Hey you, it's true! With the last update on my data-based Evertale tier list of 2024, analyzing, as always, 1000 top teams from around the world. We have 3 new units to cover first. Let's start with Yukata Ludmilla, the unit released without a dedicated event. And despite certain limitations if Guardians are around, this Ludmilla is a very strong supporter. The stun absorption in combination with her counter gaining can be very nice. She introduced the purified chain to the game as well, which is good but not spectacularly so, and sometimes a little confusing because it's hard to follow what is going on with it on the battlefield at high speeds. If she has no Guardians on her team, then she also provides your units with vital damage reduction. So despite not being a guard herself, this second Light Ludmilla makes it into SS tier just as the second Earth Ludmilla, Yukata Ludmilla, did before her. If you wanna risk going guardless in your first 4 in Arena, she kinda has to be there, but even if you don't, Yukata Ludmilla is a very popular pick for the 5th position, so as a first entry. For example, after the other top stun absorber in Light Anya has died. Moving on to the next unit that has made sleep more relevant again, it is Tristan. This water unit brings a lot to the table. It starts with her immediately getting the turn after the first enemy turn when she is on the field. The disabling pulse is especially strong against sleep immune movable units, so those are getting replaced by imposters. This can particularly be an issue for a Storm King Arthur in front if there's no other high hate unit with him. With her. Tristan can spread sleep like crazy. She also gets turns with certain skills when she attacks sleeping units, and she's also kind of the first sleep unit that comes with an execute skill. All that isn't enough because she's also having quite a pesky survival mechanic. She has this kind of endure hold ground combo, which means that she's extremely hard to kill because she also cannot die to poison or burn status effects. She does still have some weaknesses though, like being stunned for example, and so she barely misses the SSS tier, also because she is quite sleep specific, although some hybrids can work with her. But of course she needs to be afraid. Looking forward, the new Dark Lancelot release that we cannot cover in this tier list edition yet might have certain implications on sleep teams up front, because that Lancelot is sleep immune when water enemies are around. I'm very curious to see where Tristan lands in 2025, but for now we keep moving forward to Excalibur, the very first blood unit in quite a while, pretty much over a year after the first Dark King Arthur. And while she brings a lot of interesting mechanics to the field with the new super Moris that are 100% auto guards in comparison to the old Moris that are only 60%, and those Moris also do not trigger any kind of savage effects. However, they are of course still very vulnerable to somebody like Cthulhu and may trigger her getting turns again and again. But still, the skill combination on Excalibur I think is quite compelling. I do think she is a bit held back by her AI, which isn't always making the optimum choices from what I've seen on the battlefield. The cool thing is she does come with an execute skill. The not so cool thing is that it is a bit hard to fit her in the current meta. There are some hybrid builds that can work with her, however the Mori sweep makes her a no-no to combine with any kind of sleep team, for example. She is very much a poison blood unit at the heart, and so it is a bit ironic that I feel like she's specifically weak to poison. Yes, she has ways to get stealth shields and so kind of avoiding being poisoned sometimes. But yeah, she sometimes dies very easily, but sometimes really stays along for quite a long time and makes good use of all her skills, constantly kind of producing these super Moris. Then again, even just showing up, she already produces 4 super Moris straight away, kind of giving you 4 additional 100% guards that are admittedly very weak, but again, they are not triggering any savage effects on enemies, for example. And so she only makes it into S tier for now, even barely so, to be honest. However, I do think there's quite a good use case for her in certain teams. Also at just one copy, just like Yukata Ludmilla, she gives good value there straight away. So, since there isn't enough data on the new Dark Lancelot yet, this leaves us with the tier changes and we go from bottom to the top. We have a few units dropping to the D tier, and that is first and foremost Storm Rolosha, a very old unit that is still holding on to the top 60 after all this time. However, even as a filler, she doesn't quite bring enough to the party anymore. Her entry effect is still nice with the double stun. However, there are so many immunities, wards and get turns flying around that she is just getting pushed down quite heavily now. Another unit dropping is Earth Orsia. This stealth poison unit has time units that are just a bit too long for this meta. Funnily enough, one of her main concerns back after her release was the release of Commander Astrid and the subsequent rise of Burn, which she is very weak against. Why is this a little bit funny at least? I mean, she is dropping now to the D tier despite all the Burn units heavily dropping in this edition, and this is pretty much all thanks to the newest Tristan release. I think Yukata Ludmilla might have something to do with that as well, given that she's one more stun absorber and Burn teams have pretty much become Burn stun hybrid teams at this point. And so yeah, let's quickly cover all of them together, because we have Fire Ilmina, this kind of Burn stun entry unit dropping from C to D tier. We also see the two Astrids, Bright and Commander, going from B to C tier. We have Gilgamesh, the first ever released Burn Executor unit, going from A to B tier. After Tristan's release, there has already been an uptick in Water Cinderella's usage, and Water Cinderella pretty much completely disables Gilgamesh from doing her Royal Judgment, because Water Cinderella is permanently burn immune. It doesn't quite end there, because also we see Lebu, Mordred and even Cerberus, the top burn guard, dropping from S to A tier, where they are now chilling together with the most recent fire release, Kaguya. Now this leaves burn, or more specifically fire units, at the weakest point in their entire history since I've been doing these rankings in 3.5 years. They were never this low. There is no burn unit currently in any of the S tiers. If you do run a burn team, I am a bit sorry for you, but stay strong. I think there will be a new burn unit coming soon that might flip that on its head yet again, even if at the moment it is hard to imagine what it takes to really bring them into the spotlight again, especially considering the kind of specific dedication that it needs to build a burn team. Now with all that burn focus, we skipped one other unit that is rather weak to burn, that is also dropping from C to D tier, and that is Earth Anya. This 100% guard now has only under 7% usage left, which is interesting because there is as much poison flying around as never before pretty much, which should help Earth Anya, but it's just not enough to make her relevant, because even if there are 4 poisoned enemies, she just has that 40% damage reduction, which given the current attack scalings is just not enough to stay alive. There are a lot more valid poison guards, well, not poison guards, but you know, guards for poison teams than using Earth Anya. Granted, Earth Anya is already pretty much 3 years old at this point, so she has been around for quite a while. Another unit dropping from B to C tier this time is Storm Clarice. This Storm combo unit was the second executor ever. Had quite a good run together with Dark Cleopatra, especially since she has such a nice Triumph skill. Then again, her attack scalings are just not quite there anymore for what we are used to see nowadays. Speaking of nowadays, we have 2 newer units actually from summer this year that are already going to the C tier. Down and down they go, and that is Genie and Frankenstein, both of which really didn't make a name for themselves in the meta. Both of them have some niche applications where they work well, but mostly as supporters or delayers. But you know, it's not too bad to have some flop units released from time to time. This actually gives us a bit of extra time to save for stronger units. On the plus side, they at least did a bit better than I expected in my recent epic 1v1 battle of history. Looking a bit further up from A to B tier, we see a move from Earth Sleeping Beauty, the very first unit in the game that introduced Cursed Sleep with her Thorns. At some point she was arguably the strongest unit in the game, as long as there are no burn units around. But the big problem for her now are the execute skills that completely ignore the thorns that would usually keep her alive. 2 stun units in Giga Rolosha and Himiko are also going down from A to B tier. Giga Rolosha with the lowest speed in the entire game. She comes with a speed of 1, of course suffers from the current speedy meta. Very, very rare to see her get off a Chrono Chaos at this point of the meta. Himiko can still be good sometimes towards the end of a battle with her wall breaker, but she really doesn't like poison, and so that is one reason I think that she is dropping as well. And then we also see another 100% guard dropping. Those are quite affected this time, possibly connected to Avatar Ludmilla's release. But yeah, this one is Bright Ludmilla going down to the B tier. But honestly, she's been around for 3.5 years at this point, and she still has 36.9% usage among these 1000 top teams, which is honestly impressive. So hats off to her, and this just speaks to the power of really universal guards, even if she rarely brings her Shield of Eldine down these days. Another unit dropping from S to A tier is Odin. This Storm unit brought so many pseudo guards to the table, to the battle with her ravens, but I think the release of Cthulhu was a bit of a turning point for her. This feels like a nerf to her that Odin kind of has to take personally. Of course, still very decent value brought to the table, especially when she's not facing some super or mega poison units like Cthulhu. And if she gets the Supreme Stun off, I mean, 500 time unit stun often takes out a unit pretty much entirely, unless she gets the turn in some other way. Now we are looking at the top tiers already, and there we see a bit of a range of kind of universal hybrid units that are just no longer seen or as much seen in the top platoons, especially in the first platoons of Arena. And those units that are kind of pushed back are the first initial Dark Cleopatra, especially because she always had that kind of interruption potential with her imposter mechanic. But now the speed, I think, is just not enough anymore. She just gets steamrolled before she gets a chance to do the Dusk Mirage in many cases. Not always, and I mean, she's still strong, but she is being relegated to later platoons at an alarming rate. Still, all of these units that I'm about to mention that are dropping are still having over 50% usage, so obviously they are still very strong. They are just not seen anymore in the platoon ones of the top teams, pretty much. So the same is true for Percival, who has that super strong execute move. What is kind of nice, if she comes in later and is fully awakened and has high stats, she can kind of use that execute move straight away, since it's kind of also a vengeance skill, so that can often be quite devastating for an enemy team. But up front, it's no longer quite enough. The combination with Cleopatra was always very nice because of that very strong effect that any of Percival's kills do, and the kind of blast wave can hit imposters, stunning enemies massively with that kind of combo. But yeah, it is what it is, and the same is true for another dark unit, and that is Cinderella. She's also going down, despite having 77.7% usage, which is the 4th highest of any SSR in this list. And she still has enormous turnaround potential in later platoons of Arena, sometimes coming in and doing that kind of berserker moves, easily taking out some units that might have terrorized your team for the entire battle up until that point. But again, she is no longer a great starter unit. I mean, she hasn't been for quite a while, to be fair, just a little too vulnerable to all kinds of status effects. And given the faster and faster pace of battles, the time lock on her hold ground plus reset is getting more and more punitive as well. And then we have the final guard drop of today in Bright Lancelot. This stun guard with 100% chance of a redirect, of course, is still quite relevant, but of course she doesn't like many of these recent releases. Similar to Odin, she hates facing Cthulhu. On the one hand, Cthulhu pretty much ignores her anyways, so she cannot use the guarding to actually protect her team, at least for a bit. And then, you know, she just dies to the super poison, to the mega poison that gets flying around. And with the release of the new Dark Lancelot, funnily enough, this will not get any better for her. And what also isn't talked about as much, but I think sometimes is quite infuriating if you run her, because she has that kind of non-stun stun skin that stuns enemies on every second hit for 100 time units. But since there are so many mechanics nowadays that give an attacking unit another turn, this is oftentimes completely negated. And so yeah, these 4 units that are pretty much seen in all kinds of hybrid teams and are still seen in most teams are dropping to the S tier now. And this actually only leaves us with one more move. Can you guess who it is? It is none other than Unicorn, dropping from the SSS to the SS tier. She had massive losses in my latest SSR world rankings, perhaps deservedly so. I mean, you heard me talk about it probably before that. I think she really only brings her passives to the table. Her actives are not really spectacular. And don't get me wrong, she's still extremely good. She has that kind of armoring effect. The stun on entry is sick, although it is negated somewhat by units like Tristan. But yeah, 50 time units stun on enemy entry, still quite good to give your team that additional momentum boost. That being said, after being a prime platoon 1 unit for a few months, she is now more often seen in platoon 2s, still oftentimes together in combination with Dark Sun Wukong, who can quickly duplicate to up to 5 copies if the stars align just right, which Unicorn oftentimes ensures. The other 3 units in SSS tier stay the same. We still have Musashi as the oldest unit in that tier, that absolute 0 execute skill that can hit beyond guards is quite nice, especially in combination with somebody like Cthulhu, who is still an extremely steamrolly unit at full awakening, getting the turn every time a new enemy enters the battlefield. Arguably the strongest or most broken get turn passive in the game so far. She just lacks that execute skill and is quite random, given that all of her active skills are random, but in Arena this is not always a disadvantage. And if her warped reality triggers and she is destined to die, she still becomes a top guard for your team, a kind of hypnotizing guard with 90% damage reduction. That is extremely hard to kill. Just certain execute skills can make good short work of her in that stage. One of which is Storm King Arthur's, the number 1 unit in Evertale Arena. Still, if Cthulhu, for example, is stunned highly, then the Regal Wavemaster of Storm King Arthur takes her out. But Cthulhu is certainly not the only unit that has to fear that skill from Storm King Arthur, especially because it can also be used if you're just at low HP, even at low TU. Other than that, the package is still nice on Storm King Arthur in terms of that survivability, the constant refreshing of the wards, the kind of stealth and stealth shields, very powerful attacks, very high speed. Even if she's banished, she comes in again with some very strong stunning, at least with a good speed, but also if she is at the start of the battlefield, of course, with the King's Dawn, which makes her a real menace to deal with. I did think she might drop a little bit due to Tristan's release that didn't really show up in the data. Instead, it seems like there are certain hybrid builds even with King Arthur and Tristan combined in the front. And so it remains to be seen which unit can actually take this throne away from Storm King Arthur. That's it for now. Here's the tier list, the last one in 2024, based on 1000 teams from Japan, from the Americas, from the rest of Asia, from Europe. As you can imagine, collecting all that data, putting it all together, analyzing it, running it through my various algorithms and analysis tools, and ultimately producing this video takes quite a while, so I would really appreciate your support with a quick click on the like button so that the YouTube gods might bless me. A picture version of this tier list will be made available on my Discord server as usual, linked in the description. Subscribe to become a true carrot. It is really good for your eyesight. And as always, thanks for watching.
Hey, did you know that carrots are good for your eyesight?
You lied to me.